within Tamil Nadu we have to balance off the more moderate elements, and there are moderate elements, such as the Hindu newspaper group, against the more radical views of Jayatilleka Jairam. Now, in order to do that, we have to settle our relations with our own north, with the Tamil democratic leadership of Sambandhan and Vigneshwaran, on the basis of implementing the 13th Amendment. That might be the last chance we have before it gets out of control.
Doctor, now this situation that we're seeing in India and also its link with Sri Lanka and this threat to sovereignty, as you said, that could happen if Jayatilleka keeps on her role of making these bold statements and really make an impact on the central government. This similar situation can be now seen in Ukraine, where we see Russia really having a hold on Ukraine. They have stepped up their military power in the Crimea Peninsula, specifically in the Ukraine, and that was after the Ukrainian government of Viktor Yanukovych was thrown out, and now they have an interim government in Ukraine. Now here we see players that have absolutely no link to the Ukraine, like the NATO, saying, you know, we need to support the current government, the interim government in Ukraine. We see U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry hoping to visit Ukraine. We see William Hague saying that he is hoping to visit Ukraine. We see the G7 made up of countries like Germany, France, the US, all saying that they are going to provide financial assistance to the interim government in Ukraine, all condemning Russia's move to step up military presence in the Crimea Peninsula and other areas in Ukraine. Russia, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, is saying that this is being done in the interest of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine and specifically in Crimea. What is the underlying message that can be taken out of this sort of drama unfolding in the Ukraine?
Well, it's to do with the realities of politics throughout history. Russia, like any state, would like a protective kind of buffer on its borders, and it had very clearly indicated that Ukraine, which was a part of the former Soviet Union, should not drift into the arms of NATO. That Russia didn't want the Western alliance to come to its own borders. Now, things were all right when you had President Yanukovych, who after all was an elected president, and he was balancing. He had good relations with the Russians, but he kept Ukraine, independent, while recognizing the realities of its big neighbor and the apprehensions of Russia. The Russians reciprocated by giving economic assistance and so on. Now, the West supported the overthrow of a democratically elected president, whatever that president's track record was. He was democratically elected. 1/4 of this new parliament consists of a neo-Nazi party. The president was overthrown not by Gandhian methods, but by militia in balaclavas, in black balaclavas, carrying AK-47s who hit the streets. 20 Ukrainian policemen were killed by these militia. So it was a violent overthrow of a democratically elected government and the installation of a new administration in the Ukrainian parliament. Now the Americans and the West don't say a word about the fact that it was a democratically elected president who was overthrown, and that it was a militia which was part of this opposition which overthrew him. No. They talk about the new administration as legitimate, though it was not an elected administration.
And it says that Russia is breaching the sovereignty of the state.
So from the point of view of Russia, look, there was a friendly president who was an elected president. It's not as if Russia went in and overthrew an unfriendly president or any kind of elected president. Now, a regime change has taken place through essentially violent means in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine. And that has a knock-on effect on Russian security. The Russians aren't blind to that, and they're just not going to be passive. Now, in the Ukraine, in one part of the Ukraine, 51% of the people, well, over 51%, are Russian speakers and of Russian ethnic origin. And they're very apprehensive about what's going on in the rest of the country and in the capital, Kiev. And they don't want to be second-class citizens. So they are looking to Russia, Mother Russia, for protection. The Russians have, as part of the deal which led to which came out of the decomposition of the Soviet Union, it is important military bases, naval bases in that area, in the Crimea. And Russian influence over the Crimea, I mean, if you take the poem, the Charge of the Light Brigade, it was all about the Crimea. So this goes back centuries. So Russia will try to protect, even if it means carving out a buffer in the Crimea. This is the reality of politics throughout history. The same thing happened in Georgia when a pro-NATO, a pro-Western president, of course he was an elected president, Mikhail Saakashvili, tried to overturn an accord, as it were, lessons for us, overturn an accord and send in his troops to part of the country which had, again, people who had close ties with Russia. The Russian military moved in under the old peace deal and pretty much carved out Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And nobody talks about that. Of course, the West set the whole ball rolling by supporting the separation of Kosovo and the breakup of Yugoslavia. So now when they criticize Russia for interference in Ukraine and trying to foster separatism,
it's rather ironic. Yeah.
But Sri Lanka has to understand the realities. On the one hand, we have to learn the lessons from an attempted violent regime change and the overthrow of an elected president who was seen to be close to Russia. On the other hand, we must know that when you are the neighbor of a huge country, and that huge country has co-ethnics in part of your country, then you have to manage your relations with that huge country very sagaciously. You also have to manage your relations with those co-ethnics who are your own citizens very prudently. If you're seen to be treating them as second-class citizens or you're trying to crack down, then it may draw in, on the basis of ethnic solidarity, troops from the neighboring giant neighbor. I mean, it happened to us in 87, sort of. It was M.G. Ramachandran who went to Delhi and lobbied to stop the Sri Lankan army offensive. So, what's happening in the Ukraine and what happened in Georgia is not for us to condemn, but for us to know how the game is played, and for us not to become vulnerable to one type of move, that is a regime change strategy against a democratically elected president, a regime change strategy supported by the West, who wants a puppet installed, and on the other, any kind of drawing in on the basis of common ethnic origin of troops from just across the border.
Well, Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Vantage Point. A lot for Sri Lanka to keep an eye out, not just on politics involving them, but also, as you said, politics involving the rest of the world. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you, Mahina.
And thank you, everyone, for watching us today. We'll see you again in a fortnight with another insightful episode of Vantage Point.